Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, today we will discuss the development of tongue and development of thyroid gland while we are discussing the development of head and neck. So first taking the development of tongue. Well, I've told you earlier that when buccopharyngeal membrane or oropharyngeal membrane disappears, then the stomodium, which is an ectoderm lined pit, the region of developing face, becomes continuous with the most initial part of the foregut, which is called primitive pharynx. So, thus, primitive oral cavity is brought into existence, part of which is derived from the stomodium and is lined by ectoderm, and part of it is derived from the primitive pharynx and is lined by endoderm. In the adult, we are not exactly sure where is junction of endodermal and ectodermal epithelium, because histologically the epithelium in the whole of the oral cavity is almost the same. So, in the floor of the primitive oral cavity or initial part of the pharynx, uh, the tongue begins to develop in the fourth week. You must remember that fourth week is the period of organogenesis, and almost all of the organs they begin to develop in the fourth week. Similarly, tongue also begins to develop in the fourth week. And because it is developing in the floor of the primitive pharynx, so its lining epithelium is endodermal, but we know that it is a muscular organ. So obviously the muscles and the connective tissue, blood vessel, etc., they are derived from the local mesoderm, but the musculature, as we will discuss in the end, is uh, derived from a special source which will be discussed very soon. Of course, mesodermal, but mesoderm derived from a very different source, the muscles of the tongue, skeletal muscle of the tongue. So, in the floor of the oral cavity, the primordial tongue appears in the fourth week by the proliferation of the mesenchyme in the ventral ends of the first, second, third, and fourth pharyngeal arches. What happens that due to this proliferation of mesoderm, 5 swellings are formed, which are to be taken as primordium of the tongue, or the initial beginning of the tongue. So, 3 swellings are found from the mesoderm of the first arch, and they are a pair of lateral lingual swellings and a central tuberculum impar. So, where the two first pharyngeal arches are meeting in the midline, when the lower jaw has been formed, so the proliferation of mesenchyme from the first pharyngeal arch of the right side and first pharyngeal of the arch of the left side produces these 3 swellings. Two lateral lingual swellings, which are also called distal tongue buds, and they are located one on each side of the midline, and in between them, the other little bit posteriorly, is present a single swelling produced by proliferation of mesenchyme. This is called tuberculum impar or median tongue bud. So tuberculum impar itself literally means unpaired swelling. So because it is single, so it is called tuberculum impar. The better term is median tongue bud. So lateral lingual swellings and median tongue bud. These are the better terms instead of distal tongue buds and tuberculum impar. Then just posterior to the lateral lingual swellings and the tuberculum impar is present single swelling in the midline, which is derived from the ventral ends of the second pharyngeal arches of the right and left sides. This swelling, single swelling in the midline, is called copula. We will just very soon see a diagram, and then you will be able to understand it in a better way. But at the moment, it's just an introduction. So copula is derived from the mesoderm of the or mesenchyme of the second pair of pharyngeal arches. Then posterior to that, another swelling, which is also midline swelling and a single swelling, appears by the proliferation of mesoderm in the ventral ends of the third and fourth pairs of pharyngeal arches. This swelling is called hypopharyngeal eminence or hypobranchial eminence. And you will now realize that now we have a pair of swellings, which is the two lateral lingual swellings which are present on each side of the midline, on the right side and left side of midline. But in the midline there are three swellings: distal tongue bud, this tubercular impar, or median tongue bud, then copula, then hypopharyngeal eminence. So three midline swellings coming from before backwards, tuberculum impar, copula, and hypopharyngeal eminence. And there are two swellings which are present because they are in the form of a pair. They are present on the side of the midline. They are lateral lingual swellings. And because we are going to discuss thyroid later on, and thyroid development is interconnected and interrelated with the development of tongue. So the primordium of the thyroid gland also appears when the tongue is developing, and it appears as a small circular pit or depression in the lining endoderm between the tubercle impar and copula. And this is called foramen cecum. Even in the adult, we have this foramen on the tongue, visible as a pit. So this is the beginning of development of thyroid gland, which is called foramen cecum. We take a diagram. So here you see from the first pharyngeal arch, these are the two distal tongue buds or lateral lingual swellings, 1, 2, right side, left side. And in the center there is single swelling, which is the median tongue bud or the tuberculum impar. Then we come to the second pharyngeal arches at the ventral ends, where the two pharyngeal arches meet in the floor of the oral cavity, appears a circular swelling which is called copula, and behind that another midline swelling, as you can see from the third and fourth pharyngeal arches, which is a larger swelling. It is called hypopharyngeal eminence. So three midline swellings: median tongue bud or tubercular impar, copula, and hypopharyngeal eminence, and two swellings which are present on one on each side of the midline. They are called distal tongue buds. So a total of 5 swellings are there from which the tongue will develop. So what happens? We will discuss again. This diagram we will take again. This is a diagram or a picture actually showing high power, probably scanning electron microscope or very high power stereo microscope view of the developing tongue in an embryo of early 6th week, where we see that the distal tongue buds or the lateral lingual swellings, two lateral lingual swellings can be seen, and behind them this single tubercular impar of median tongue bud is also uh, discernible, can be seen, and this is the floor of the mouth, and these are the mandibular swelling, the part of the first pharyngeal arches, which are forming the lower jaw mandibular swellings of the right side, mandibular swelling of the left side. We pass on to further what happens. So the lateral lingual swellings, they grow medially and anteriorly to form the body of the tongue. Body of the tongue means anterior 2/3 of the tongue. So when the lateral lingual swellings grow in a medial direction, they overgrow the tuberculum impar, and thus the tissue of the tuberculum impar disappears, and the two lateral lingual swellings fuse with each other in the midline, and tubercular impart does not give any contribution to the body of the adult tongue. Anterior two-thirds of the tongue or body of the adult tongue is derived entirely from the lateral lingual swellings, and where the two lateral lingual swellings meet each other and fuse with each other, sulcus is present even in the adult, and it can be seen in the adult tongue, and we will see in a diagram as we pass on to the next slides. Median sulcus shows and proves and indicates that the body of the tongue has been made by the fusion of two structures, and these structures were the two lateral lingual swellings. So the tubercular impar is gone, and the copula also disappears. Why this copula doesn't contribute anything to the adult tongue? Why? Because the hypopharyngeal eminence grows rapidly and uh, takes over the space occupied by copula, presses of one copula, makes it disappear, and forms the posterior one-third or root of the tongue. And one thing to be noticed is, although the hypopharyngeal eminence originally consists of tissue derived from ventral ends of the third and fourth pharyngeal arches, but enlargement of the hypopharyngeal eminence when the tongue develops occurs mainly by the tissue of the third pharyngeal arch, and that is also reflected in the nerve supply of the tongue. We know that the posterior one-third is supplied by the nerve of the third arch, glossopharyngeal nerve. The we will take this nerve supply of the tongue later. So important thing to know is that the copula disappears by the overgrowth of the hypopharyngeal eminence, and the hypopharyngeal eminence grows itself mainly by the tissue derived from the, or mesoderm or mesenchyme derived from the third pharyngeal arch. Fourth pharyngeal arch contributes very little to the root of the tongue or posterior one-third of the tongue. And where the body and root of the tongue meet, there is an inverted V-shaped groove which is called terminal sulcus or sulcus terminalis, and at the apex of the sulcus terminalis lies the foramen cecum, which is the site of origin of the thyroid gland. So again, coming to the same diagram which we discussed earlier, you see the tongue is now growing, the pharyngeal hypopharyngeal eminence is becoming larger, and mainly the third arch tissue is uh, becoming more in amount than the tissue of the fourth arch, and here we see that the copula has disappeared due to growth of the hypopharyngeal eminence, and here we see that then passing on to the diagram, the two lateral lingual swellings or distal tongue buds, they grow anteriorly and medially. When they grow medially, they make the median tongue bud or tubercular impar disappear, and they fuse with each other along this dotted line, which is indicated in the adult tongue by the median sulcus of the tongue. And here we see that the root of the tongue, or posterior one-third of the tongue, is found mainly by tissue derived from the third pharyngeal arch, which is colored purple. This light blue color is for the fourth tissue of the fourth pharyngeal arch. You can see that it contributes very little, very small part of the most posterior part of the root of the tongue is derived from tissue of the fourth pharyngeal arch. Otherwise, most of the, or you can say almost entire part of the root of the tongue is derived from the third pharyngeal arch tissue. So the body of the tongue or anterior two-thirds from the two lateral lingual swellings which were derived from the first pharyngeal arch, and nerve of the first pharyngeal arch is the mandibular nerve. So branch of the mandibular nerve, that is lingual nerve, will supply this uh, part of the tongue, that is body of the tongue, and posterior one-third or root of the tongue will be supplied by nerve of the third pharyngeal arch. So we take if diagram of the adult tongue to see these structures. So here you see this structure which you can see if you protrude your tongue and look in the mirror. You will see this median lingual sulcus, the median circle of the tongue. This indicates the site of fusion of two lateral lingual swellings. And then you can also see this inverted V-shaped sulcus, which is called terminal sulcus or sulcus terminalis, and just anterior to the sulcus terminalis lie these large lingual papillae, which are special variety of lingual papillae, which are called circumvallate lingual papillae or vallate lingual papillae. And this is the root of the tongue, which is derived from the third pharyngeal arch tissue. And here you can see that these small elevations, these indicate the lingual tonsil, because the tissue, the mesoderm of the posterior one third of the tongue, later on in development becomes infiltrated by lymphoid tissue, and this lymphoid tissue, which is consisting of lymphoid follicles, it forms small aggregations in the posterior one third of the tongue, and these aggregations combined and together, all of them are known as lingual tonsil. So posterior one third of the tongue is rough in appearance due to the presence of the lingual tonsil, shows grooves and elevations, and these indicate the aggregations of lymphoid tissue in the posterior one third of the tongue. So this is the sulcus terminalis, which marks the junction of the body and root of the tongue. Then the muscles of the tongue, I told you that they are derived from some special source. What is that special source? That special source is occipital myotomes. See the somites which are formed in the occipital region, they differentiate into their different parts, which are the myotomes and dermamyotomes and sclerotomes, and from dermamyotomes, myotomes and dermatomes are formed. So myotomes of the occipital somites, they give rise to myoblasts or muscle immature muscle cells, muscle forming cells, which migrate to the developing tongue and settle down there to form the musculature, skeletal musculature of the tongue. And a clue to their origin is that they are supplied by hypoglossal nerve. They are not supplied by the nerve of the first arch. The mandibular nerve does not supply them. They are supplied by 12th cranial nerve, which we know from our knowledge of comparative embryology and from our knowledge of evolution that this nerve is the nerve of the 12th cranial nerve is the nerve of the occipital myotomes. So because it is supplying the muscles of the tongue, so this is an indirect evidence that muscles of the tongue are derived from the occipital myotomes, which migrate from the posterior region of the neck where occiput is present, and they come to lie in the region of developing neck, come to lie in the region of developing tongue to give rise to the skeletal muscle of the tongue, and they are supplied by hypoglossal nerve. Then coming to the sensory nerve supply of the tongue, this which we have touched already. We touched it when we discussed the development of the tongue. The anterior two-thirds of the tongue, its sensory supply is by the lingual nerve. General sensation is by the lingual nerve, which is a nerve of the first pharyngeal arch, a branch of the mandibular nerve, which is a nerve of the first pharyngeal arch, and we know that body of the tongue is derived from mesoderm of the first pharyngeal arch. And because of the root of the tongue is supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve, which is the nerve of the third pharyngeal arch, and we know that the tissue of the root of the tongue is derived from the third pharyngeal arch, mesenchyme. Then we anomalies of the tongue, not many anomalies. One common anomaly, but it is quite simple to be treated, is called tongue tie or ankyloglossia, because it is due to a very short frenulum linguae which extend to the tip of the tongue. Normally the frenulum linguae does not extend to the tip of the tongue, but if it extends to the tip of the tongue, it hinders in the protrusion of the tongue, and the child feels difficult in speaking, and the parents bring the child to the doctor with a complaint of child not being able to speak properly, or there is problem with learning of the words or delivery of the words. This is called tongue tie, and the surgeons perform a small operation and cut the extra frenulum linguae, and they can treat it. Then the rare anomaly, bifid tongue, when it is tongue is divided into partly or completely into two parts because of failure of fusion of the two lateral lingual swellings. And microglossia, when the tongue is very small in size, or macroglossia, when the tongue is larger in size. This is commonly seen in cases of Down syndrome. Otherwise, it is very rare. And microglossia is seen as a part of micronathia. When the mandible is underdeveloped, the condition is called micronathia. And we have already studied in previous lecture in the anomalies dealing with the development of pharyngeal arches in the craniofacial anomalies. Micronathia, small mandible. The mandible is small, underdeveloped tongue is also underdeveloped, and there is microglossia. If we see a diagram of the ankyloglossia, this is a normal tongue. The frenulum is extending not to the tip of the tongue, but here we see that the frenulum linguae is extending to the tip of the tongue. This is ankyloglossia. Another diagram, normal lingual frenulum, they extending just to the undersurface of the tongue, much away from the tip. But here you can see in this extensive lingual frenulum, when it extends the tip of the tongue, it causes or produces tongue tie. And this is a diagram of the rare anomaly, bifid tongue, which is of course very rare but sometimes seen, and you can very well see that is a partial failure of fusion of two lateral lingual swellings. They are fused posteriorly, but their anterior part they have failed to fuse, and the tongue is bifid partly. Then we come to the development of thyroid gland, which also develops from the floor of the mouth, and we have already discussed that the foramen cecum indicates the place of origin of thyroid gland when tongue has started developing. The fourth week, and endodermal downgrowth from the floor of the pharynx, located just caudal to the tuberculum impar and indicated by foramen cecum in the adult. A downgrowth of the endoderm grows in a downward direction, and this is called thyroglossal duct. So this downgrowth is hollow and tubular, except at its distal end where it remains solid. The distal solid end is the future thyroid, and the proximal narrow tubular part of this diverticulum is called thyroglossal cyst, and this is a temporary duct. And as you will see in the diagram, this disappears when the thyroid are descended to its normal position. So it becomes, the thyroid descends, thyroglossal duct becomes longer and longer, but remains connected temporarily to the tongue in the region of foramen cecum by thyroglossal duct. So this is a diagram showing the pharynx and its derivatives. So from the floor of the pharynx, we see in the region of foramen cecum, this thyroid diverticulum has appeared. Its proximal part is narrow, and it is called thyroglossal duct. And its distal part is solid, and soon it shows two lobes, because we know that the adult thyroid consists of two lobes. So there is a right thyroid lobe and left thyroid lobe. So this primitive thyroid gland in the very early development shows the evidence of lobation. It becomes divided into two lobes, and finally it will become completely divided into two lobes, and just the isthmus will connect the two lobes in the adult thyroid. So this diagram is also to introduce you to the same from the floor of the pharynx. The region of foramen cecum is thyroid diverticulum has grown downward. Distal part has become dilated and has become solid and is dividing into two lobes. But this proximal part is tubular and hollow and duct-like. This is called thyroglossal duct, and this will atrophy later on, regress and disappear. But at this time the thyroid is descending. It has reached the level of hyoid bone, but it will descend further, and finally it will come to lie on each side of the trachea in the form of two lobes connected by a, a central isthmus. Another diagram is showing is the just origin of the thyroid diverticulum from foramen cecum, just behind the tuberculum impar, and becoming this is you can see the thyroglossal duct as the thyroid gland grows downward and distal part becomes dilated and solid and remains connected to the tongue by this thyroglossal duct. That is why it is known as thyroglossal duct. Thyroid and glossum is for the tongue. Thyroglossal duct connecting the thyroid gland with the tongue. And as the thyroid descends further and is dividing into two lobes, this thyroglossal duct becomes solid and then begins to break down, begins to atrophy and break down, and finally, when the thyroid gland has settled to its normal place, just below the thyroid cartilage of the larynx, by that time, normally this thyroglossal duct, as this dotted line indicates, this disappears completely, leaving no remnant except a small pit at the apex of the sulcus terminalis of the tongue, which is foramen cecum, indicating the site of origin of thyroid gland from the floor of the pharynx between the tuberculum impar and copula. So, this we have already discussed. Passes down, gradually assumes its adult shape to lateral lobes, and there is a median isthmus, and uh, the isthmus is passing in front of second and third tracheal rings, and on lateral side of trachea, the two lateral lobes of the thyroid become applied. But one thing you have to remember from our previous discussion, the parafollicular cells or C cells. We discussed it again and again when we discussed the fourth pharyngeal pouch. We discussed that its ventral wing becomes solid and is known as ultimobranchial body. Its endodermal cells become replaced completely by neural crest cells, and then they differentiate into C cells which spread into the developing uh, thyroid uh, gland, and there they mix up with the thyroid follicles which are endodermal in origin and remain associated with the thyroid follicles as parafollicular cells or C cells which secrete calcitonin. So the thyroid gland, the thyroid follicles which are derived from endoderm of the thyroid primordium or from endoderm of the thyroglossal duct, they produce the thyroid hormones T3 and T4, and the production of thyroid hormones starts by the end of the 12th week of development. So this thyroxine is important in the development of the fetus. That is why the thyroid gland begins to produce its secretion by the end of 12th week of development. But remember that parafollicular cells or C cells are not endodermal in origin. They are not derived from the endoderm of the thyroglossal duct or from the thyroid primordium, but they are migrant cells. They are migrated from the fourth pharyngeal pouch, from the ventral wing of the fourth pharyngeal pouch or the ultimobranchial body that is the ultimobranchial bodies of both sides, the right side and left side. Right side gives to C cells to the right lobe of the thyroid gland, and ultimobranchial body of the left side gives the C cells to the left lobe of thyroid gland. So next, development anomalies which are related to the thyroid gland development. See, the thyroglossal cyst is a quite common anomaly, and it is a remnant of the thyroglossal duct. When a remnant of the thyroglossal duct persists, it becomes cystic. Cyst means a sac-like structure lined by an epithelium containing a fluid in it, and this is also known as median cervical swelling or thyroglossal cyst. As compared to the lateral cervical cyst, this is a kind of median cervical cyst. The lateral cervical cyst is derived from a remnant of the cervical sinus and is located along the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid. So not in the midline but laterally, that is why it is known as lateral cervical cyst, and is usually located uh, just close to the angle of mandible along the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid. But this thyroglossal cyst, it is located right. It is located right in the midline, and is derived from a remnant of the thyroglossal duct. And thyroglossal duct does not disappear completely, does not regress completely, and some part of it persists. This will give rise to a cyst filled by fluid lined by epithelium, and it is located usually just inferior to the body of the hyoid bone. So very close to the hyoid bone is the location of the thyroglossal cyst, but that is the usual location. It can be higher or lower. And we will see it in the next slide in a diagram. Sometimes the thyroglossal cyst opens to the exterior, its wall perforates and opens to the exterior by an opening through which its contents, the fluid present in it, leaks, and this is known as thyroglossal fistula. And treatment of both thyroglossal duct and thyroglossal cyst and thyroglossal fistula is surgical excision. Very easy procedure. The surgeons operate, and they, if it is not operated, especially if it is thyroglossal fistula, it will become infected. It can become infected and cause problems. And even if there is just thyroglossal cyst, it produces cosmetic problems and also pressure symptoms. So that treatment is surgical removal. Then the ectopic thyroid tissue, um, remnant of the thyroglossal duct may not change into a thyroglossal cyst but may differentiate into thyroid tissue, and that thyroid tissue will be present in aberrant position somewhere from the foramen cecum to the normal location of the thyroid gland. So the most usual location of the ectopic thyroid tissue is in the base of the tongue, where it is, if present, it is known as lingual thyroid. And persistence of the caudal end of the thyroglossal duct is quite common, and that gives rise to a small lobe which is attached to the isthmus. This is known as pyramidal lobe of thyroid. This is not an anomaly. This is quite commonly present. So this diagram shows the location of the thyroid tissue. Aberrant thyroid tissue may be present in the base of the tongue, may be present close to the thyroid, may be present just anterior to the thyroid cartilage, or many times persists as pyramidal lobe attached to the isthmus of the thyroid. This diagram also shows the aberrant or ectopic thyroid tissue. This is the lingual thyroid. Then the accessory thyroid tissue close to the hyoid bone. And then this is the pyramidal lobe of the thyroid gland, which is not to be considered as an abnormality, but this is abnormal thyroid tissue. And this is clinically important because sometimes when the thyroid has undergone some diseases for which it has to be excised, like Graves' disease or thyrotoxicosis, sometimes it is noted that the thyroid gland has been completely removed, total thyroidectomy has been performed, and still the features or signs and symptoms of thyrotoxicosis persist, and then doctors have to think of aberrant thyroid tissue. Then investigated, and many times it is found that in the base of the tongue, aberrant thyroid tissue is present in the form of lingual thyroid, and that has undergone the same pathological changes as the main thyroid itself, and then it has to be removed as well. So, knowledge of lingual thyroid is very important clinically as well. So, this diagram shows us the pyramidal lobe of the thyroid gland, a normal position of the thyroid gland, two lateral lobes joined to each other by isthmus, which lies in front of the second and third tracheal rings, and the pyramidal lobe representing the lowermost part of the thyroglossal duct, which failed to disappear and was differentiated into thyroid tissue. This is quite commonly seen and cannot be regarded as an anomaly. So, another slide which shows us anomaly which we have discussed, that is the thyroglossal cyst or median cervical cyst, located in the midline, usually close to the hyoid bone. There you can see just below the hyoid bone. This is thyroglossal cyst. And what has happened in this patient? That this cyst, no swelling is there because the fluid has leaked through an opening which has been formed in this cyst, and now this is a thyroglossal fistula, and you can see the fluid leaking from it causing inconvenience, and it can also lead to infection of this fistula and underlying space. So this is thyroglossal fistula, and both of them need surgical removal for cosmetic reasons or for other clinical exigencies like pressure symptoms or infection, and the surgeons operate and they move, but they are quite common. This thyroglossal cyst is a quite common condition, and many times as you will go to your clinical wards, you will see the thyroglossal cyst, and you will have to distinguish this median cervical cyst, the cervical cyst which is present in the midline of the neck, from a lateral cervical cyst which is present on the lateral side of the neck, on the right side, on the left side, just along the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid. That is a remnant of the cervical sinus, and the thyroglossal cyst is a remnant of the thyroglossal duct. So you must distinguish between these two. They are different in position. One is present laterally and is remnant of cervical sinus, and one is present in the midline, right in the midline, and that is the remnant of the thyroglossal duct. And again, to repeat, uh, as you can see in the diagram on the right side, there is this opening in the midline of the neck through which the fluid contents are coming out. This is a thyroglossal fistula. So both of these conditions are clinically important, common, and every doctor must know how to tackle with them. So